Hello, everybody, and welcome. Today, I am speaking to Jordan Phang, who is a consultant from Naavik. And Jordan recently wrote a report on FPS shooter games called Mobile FPS What's Next After Battle Royale. And so I thought it would be great to talk to Jordan about the report and the current outlook and numbers around mobile FPS shooter games, right, Jordan?
Yep. And to be clear, it doesn't isn't just about FPSs, but the gamut of shooter types on mobile that you get.
Right. And it'd be great to kind of dive into your outlook in terms of the shooter market as well as like the specific perspective on subgenres. But maybe before diving in, Jordan, do you want to tell us a little bit more about you and your background?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm currently with Naavik as a consultant, but prior to that, I was working as a principal game designer for a company here in Melbourne, Australia, where I'm based, called League of Geeks. Um, and I got my start in games as a indie dev, so back in the Flash days, if you remember. So from there, I moved on to several jobs and ended up in Melbourne in EA working on Real Racing 3, rise up to lead game designer, and met some people over there who connected me with Naavik, and here I am.
Great. All right, well, let's dive right in. So I thought we could just start by characterizing the market for mobile shooter games in terms of like the size trends that you're seeing and maybe some of the if you could talk about maybe some of the bigger games in the market. What's your current outlook, or what did you guys cover in the report on that?
Yeah, so actually, shooter games are pretty well known, like, names like PUBG, Free Fire, Apex Legends. But in terms of mobile, they are a pretty small market. So they're like 5% of the games market in terms of downloads and around 6% for revenue. So over the date that I was analyzing the data, which was October 2021 to November 2020, shooter downloads were about 2.6 billion and revenue was about 3.5 billion. So that just puts into context how big the games market is. Yeah, so just a little data caveat. We're using data AI for our analysis.
Mhm.
So they're making estimates. So depending on the data platform, numbers may vary. And for example, like it doesn't include in-game advertising revenue. So
Right.
yeah, but at the end of the day, it's not really about the absolute numbers, but it's more about the trends and takeaways that we see.
Sure. And do you have any perspectives on that? So you mentioned that the shooter market, in terms of the overall mobile gaming market, comprises what you said 5 or 6%, depending on if you're looking at downloads or revenue. But when we look at the top 10, you've got games like Games for Peace and Green and Free Fire, games like that that are kind of in the top. Is that just because there's high concentration in terms of the winners in the market, or what did you see?
Yeah, so there is a very high concentration of winners in the market, and there is also a very different type of market. That's basically shooters for China and shooters for the rest of the world, and also a small little pocket of shooter for Japan. Um, so it's not like you can say shooters for everyone across the globe. So it's quite segmented, and
Okay.
China actually holds the biggest chunk of like revenue, and it's only based on like two games.
Why don't we go ahead and just jump into that? So what are those two games? And I assume for Japan, is that Knives Out or is there anything else?
Basically, Knives Out, yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right. And so the two games for China?
So China is basically Game for Peace, like you mentioned, and
Mhm.
Crossfire. There's also like a really old game, We Fire, but it's kind of died down now, and it's really and not even Crossfire is like way below Game for Peace. Game for Peace is like really the dominant shooter game over there.
Right. And do you have any perspective on why these games are doing so well in China versus, well, obviously, Games for Peace is basically kind
PUBG,
of a
yeah,
slightly
yeah.
modified PUBG, but do you have any specific perspective on why these games are doing so well in China?
I think one thing that they've done well is have like a much more playful aesthetic in China. If you look at like the top games in China, they're generally they skew away from like very realistic, very gritty art styles, and so Game for Peace has all sorts of fanciful characters. And for me, I think it comes with the cultural. In China they have like novel Sanxia and Wuxia, which is all about fanciful effects and like they. Have you seen like some of the Chinese novels, the kind of stuff that they
Mhm.
wear? It's all very
Yeah.
colorful and uh, beautiful. So I think it comes with that sort of aesthetic. And like looking at some videos of Game for Peace, like the characters look like sometimes characters out of Sanxia novels. So I think partly it's because of that.
Right. And when we talk about okay, so when we talk about the Chinese market, it seems like there's these two games dominating. In Japan, there's Knives Out. Um, what about the US? And do you think there are other games that we should be looking out for that could potentially do better in one of these geographies?
In the US, it's PUBG, Call of Duty Mobile, a little bit of Free Fire as well in terms of downloads. So in terms of surprising games, there aren't really any surprises as that Mech Arena, which is doing quite well in the US in terms of
All right.
Android. So yeah, Plarium's Mech Arena, and in the report I go into that. Like it's one of the few games where Android dominates iOS in terms of revenue.
Hmm. And do you have a specific perspective on why is Mech Arena doing so well?
Yeah, I tried digging into it, and it seems like all of Plarium's games are doing way better on Android um, than iOS. So it could be just a company strategy for them.
Mhm. Okay, and maybe before we like get off of the geographical differences, Japan versus China versus US, are there like you had mentioned there's some aspect of localization and kind of fitting the theme and the fantasy and kind of like maybe the cosmetics and graphics, but from a gameplay perspective, is there anything else that you saw or that you think about when it comes to trying to adapt for these specific geographies?
Specifically for Japan, when I
Hmm.
dug into it a bit, they created a Japanese server because over a survey that NetEase did, Japanese players were more comfortable, speaking with a similar language. So that's something that they did specifically for Japan. Um, and in terms of gameplay, I think there were some small differences, but I'm not sure over the years whether those has filtered down into general PUBG because Game for Peace is kind of like the canary in the mine for Tencent, and they a lot of things that go into Game for Peace end up filtering out into PUBG later on.
Yeah, I think it's also for our audience if they're not aware. I think both of those games, the two, games that are performing so well in China, are published by Tencent. So
Yep.
we can't discount the publishing power and the distribution power of Tencent as part of the reason for some of that success, as well as timing and things of that nature.
Yep.
Okay, maybe the next topic we could talk about. You had mentioned that the report doesn't just cover FPS, but so if you were to explain to the audience how you're viewing shooters from a subgenre or classification perspective, could you talk about how you've broken out the shooter market and maybe some example games from to give the audience a better understanding of how you've kind of classified the subgenre and what are example games for each of those subgenres?
Sure. So I think two or three of them should be pretty self-explanatory. Like Battle Royale is Battle Royale. I think everyone understands that. And also FPSs, Sniper, those are pretty well known in the industry. But there's kind of some gray area in what you define as a PVE shooter and what you define as tactical shooters. When you think of tactical shooters, most people think like games like War Robots, World of Tanks Blitz, mainly vehicle-based combat. But um, this differs depending on your data platform. So Data AI actually classifies them under team deathmatch.
Yep.
So that makes sense to me. But if I had put team deathmatch in the report, people might not immediately think of what game goes into that because almost every game has a team deathmatch mode. That's any game that's multiplayer has a team deathmatch mode. So
Yeah, I think that's a difficulty, right? Is
yeah,
that what we're seeing is an evolution of the space where before games were either team deathmatch or battle royale, but now they're kind of doing both.
everything. Yeah,
Yeah, they're
like
doing everything. And so like even, I think Apex Legends included the Valorant mode. I think they may have taken it out now, but even that kind of a mode, and then it's dynamic, right? Where they're putting some modes in, they're taking them out. And so then how do you, I mean, you tell me, Jordan, how would you do that classification now? Because clearly the genre is evolving, and we're even seeing, PUBG had at one point put in Metro Royale, which is extraction shooter, and then they took it out.
yeah,
And so, like, how should people think about subgenres or classification in shooters, just given how dynamic it is?
yeah. It's going to be a tough one. I think for me, it's where the majority of game time is. So Call of Duty also has battle royale mode, but it's kind of like a side mode, whereas the team
Mhm.
deathmatch part is the
That's
bigger
right.
portion of it. And
Yep.
for Warzone, is the kind of flip the other way around. They
Yep.
also have deathmatch, but the main mode is the battle royale.
In terms of the classification that you use, could you just want to make sure the audience gets that? Could you repeat what are the classifications and the example games?
Yeah, sure. So we got battle royale, and that's
Mhm.
PUBG, Free Fire. Then we've got a second largest category, FPSs, which we've combined kind of three different categories. There's FPSs, TPS, which is third-person shooters, and tactical shooters all in one.
Hmm.
And so games like that would be Call of Duty Mobile. TPS would be like T3 Arena, and then there's the tactical shooters, which is like what I mentioned before, War Robots, World of Tanks Blitz. And then there's PvE shooters. So this is zombie gunship survival, Left to Survive, those sort of games. And
Yeah.
we also included Hunting Clasher, which again could be classified like arcade sports or action, and the devs
Yeah.
themselves consider it a simulation. So it's like there's no consensus. So which is why I just
Yeah.
bucketed it under
So
PVE.
yeah, I mean, even that categorization has a lot of problems, right? The one that you just mentioned, right? Because
Yeah,
like there's a lot of games that allow you to have both FPS and TPS, and some of those games will also include a battle royale. I think I don't know. There somebody needs to update how we think about shooters, but also given the fact that it's still kind of emerging and figuring itself out. And in the report, you also had mentioned the potential for a new subgenre, right? You want to talk about extraction shooters, or
yeah.
help characterize what is meant by extraction shooter for those in the audience who aren't aware.
All right. So extraction shooters are kind of like a new evolution of sort of battle royale. It was popularized by games on PC at first, like Escape from Tarkov. And for a while now, Naavik has been saying that it could be the next big shooter subgenre. And basically, if you think about it in a nutshell, it's like a smaller, more focused battle royale with more methodical gameplay. So it's not as crazy fast. And you also have PvE enemies. So the goal of a extraction shooter is to acquire loot and escape with the loot by going to a randomized extraction zone. And the key difference from battle royale is you bring that loot into the next game, and so it becomes more about looting and upgrading. And it's also looting is a lot slower than battle royale. In battle royale, you go loot, pick up everything in like seconds, whereas in an extraction shooter, you have to search pockets, you have to search bags, pick up the things that you need, and you have much smaller inventory. So it's a lot more tactical in that sense.
So there have been a bunch of companies, well, mainly the Chinese companies, who've been trying, who believe the same thing, right? And so there
Yeah.
have been a bunch of extraction shooter games that have come to market. Are there any in particular that you're looking at, or some that you're more impressed by than others?
I think it's still under testing. Like people are trying out things. NetEase tried
Yeah,
out Lost Light, hasn't really made a big impact. And the thing that I saw towards the tail end of 2022 was Tencent released a Chinese only game called Arena Breakout, which is
yeah,
very
they
heavily
pushed the hell out
military
of that
based.
game.
Yeah.
I don't know
Um,
I don't know how it's doing now, but at least initially they really pushed that game.
yeah. So it had some good initial numbers, but it seems to have tailed
Okay.
down. So I'm not sure if
Right.
they're continue working on it over the soft launch.
Yeah.
But it's very, I think they might have gone too realistic with that game. Like it's very military, um, uh, very methodical, very tactical.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You had mentioned that Naavik believes that extraction shooters could be the next big thing. Obviously, the major Chinese publishers also believe that. I also believe that because I'm working on an extraction shooter as well with my
Oh wow.
studio. But like, can you talk about for you your personal kind of opinion on what is your thesis or why do you believe that extraction shooters potentially could be the big next big thing on mobile?
I think for me, it's like the reason why is because like battle royale, it adds like a new way to play. Before battle royale, it was team deathmatch and uh, that games of that nature, and it's only like wow, everyone just in the map at the same time is so fresh and new. So what extraction shooters does is adding this new way to play. It's not as big an evolution like battle royale because like it's sort of a step up, but it does a few things differently that I think makes it more compelling. So number one, death is really more significant. In battle royale, you can kind of die and I'll join in the lobby for the next one. But because you lose your loot, so it adds a lot more tension. So you have to be a bit more careful, and the way you think about approaching a map becomes different. And the game also begins before you even enter the map because there's like decision making, like what gear I bring in, um, and even the third point, which is you kind of set your own win condition. Like, is my goal to go in and get some loot, some resources, get out safely real quick, or do I want to go in and kill everyone else and get as much as I can and assert my dominance. So each round can feel different depending on your goals. Whereas in battle royale, like you go the one round after the other, they're kind of the same formula again and again.
One of the things I thought was interesting in your report was that you had highlighted some differences in monetization. And when you look at the different kinds of monetization models from these different models of a shooter game, and maybe across the different subgenres, could you speak to some of the differences that you found, or how some of these games? Maybe you could also just describe how some of these games are monetizing, and then the differences that you were seeing through the data.
All right. So yeah, I think you're referring to my RPD comparison. So I did like
Mhm,
a revenue per download comparison across the subgenres, and
mhm.
Battle Royale had the highest at around like $6.50. Then FPS is at $5, PVE shooting at 150, and sniper at 90 cents. So I believe a lot of that is due to the way that these games are retaining the players, because I mapped that to the D30 retention, and basically it's kind of almost a very similar chart. We've got Battle Royale at number one with 16%, FPSs at number two at 9%, PVE at 6%, and then snipers. So I think the low retention shown by PVE and sniper games are kind of holding back its revenue because people aren't staying long enough to spend. And also, for PVE specifically, a lot of the revenue is actually generated by ads. But like if you look at the top downloads, they're all like kind of like I would say kind of lower quality games that are meant to be downloaded across T2, T3 countries and making money via ad revenue versus IAPs.
Yeah, although I would say the top performing PvE shooter is does not use ads and
Yeah,
is mainly what's the,
Hunting Clash was the top. Yeah,
you know what game I'm talking about, right? That cover shooter game that came out of China, Nikkei some or I forgot what it's
Nikkei
called.
Goddess of Victory.
Yeah, right?
When I did that analysis, I don't believe data AI classifies that as a shooter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you have a gun, you shoot. I consider that a cover shooter, but
Yeah.
all right, cool. Okay, and so when we're thinking about like extraction shooter relative to the other types of games, what do you think or how do you think the monetization for extraction shooters would perform? Or do we have data from, uh, or I guess we could look at RPD on games like Lost Light, for example, but I'm not sure if they are fully optimizing their monetization against this model. But do you have any thoughts on that?
Sorry, could you repeat the question again?
Yeah. So, okay. So you had talked about battle royale. You had talked
Mm.
about, kind of your classification that you're calling FPS, whatever.
Yeah.
But and sniper. But what about an extraction shooter? Do you have a perspective on monetization for extraction shooter?
Yeah, so extraction shooters are an interesting one. Data AI considers it an a PVE shooter because I guess they are PVE enemies, even though it is a multiplayer game as well.
Okay, we got to get them to fix that. That's completely wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so you were saying that the what kind of monetization is going into extraction shooters
Yeah,
versus
or what would you like? You like? I think part of the thesis of your report is extraction shooters are potentially going to be the next big thing. But
yeah.
then, so then I would assume you have some kind of perspective on them from a monetization perspective, or
Well, I think like some of the because the depth is so significant, there's that loss aversion aspect, which I think, depending on the developers, they could monetize loss aversion. So having like insurance, paying for insurance for your items, that kind of stuff. And also, because there's multiplayer, there's also the customization aspect of things.
all right. Well, maybe we could now talk about something I'm super excited about, which is like the future. I mean, we got so many new games coming out, right? Like, there have been so many shooter games that have been announced. And so, maybe we could talk about some of those games. I mean, one, if you could talk about some of the new games that are going to be coming up, but then also maybe your outlook on some of the ones that we should keep an eye on.
Yeah, there are actually going to be so many new games coming out in this year, and even
Mhm.
in the short term. So there's like Battlefield Mobile, Call of Duty Warzone, Rainbow Six Mobile, the Division Resurgence. There's Farlight 84, Rebel Riders, Valorant Mobile, Arena Breakout, Earth Revival. Like all these games are like pretty much coming out very soon or have been already in soft launch. The ones I'm most interested in are Rainbow Six Mobile, Valorant Mobile, and Arena Breakout,
Okay.
because for me they introduce new ways to play, a new structural format to gameplay. So Rainbow Six Mobile is essentially like Rainbow Six Siege in mobile form. So be like
Mhm.
a true tactical shooter, and Valorant Mobile is kind of like a new IP from a really big dev, and they've recently got approval for the PC version in China. So it'd be exciting to see what happens. They've been in beta testing in China the mobile version already, and it looks pretty good. And Arena Breakup, because I just want to see, like, is that the game that will start the ball rolling for extraction shooters?
Yeah. What about some of the I know, just if I look at social media, a lot of people are really excited about Warzone. Do you have any thoughts on Warzone?
Warzone, yeah.
Warzone Mobile?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
actually soft launch in Australia, so I've been
Mhm.
playing it a bit, and
Okay. Oh, great.
it's actually really fun. Like they've really tightened it a lot. Like you can get like 5 minute games.
Okay.
So it's fun, but I struggle to see why someone that's already playing PUBG, that's already playing Call of Duty, that has Battle Royale, or is playing Free Fire would switch,
Right.
because it doesn't bring a huge amount of innovation to the subgenre. There's like the Gulag, which was kind of cool when I first experienced that, but the format is the same. You jump in, loot, and then be the chicken winner.
Right. Well, I think one of the interesting insights that was published in your report was that when a new, especially IP-based shooter game came out, that there was pretty massive early adoption, and then it kind of, shark finned. So it would seem to indicate, maybe you could tell me if you think I'm right or wrong on this, but that there it feels like there's a huge appetite for a new shooter game, but after people try out the new game, then it just dramatically declines. And so, to me, what that may be indicating is that um, people kind of are used to a certain type of gameplay, like the battle royale that they're playing. With whether they're deep into COD Mobile or PUBG. Um, but they want a different experience, but they're not getting that specific new shooter experience yet, and so they just kind of jump back to the games that they were playing. But I don't know how you interpreted some of that data that you showed in your report, where we see like high, another good example was a PUBG New State, right, where a lot of people tried it and then they just kind of left.
Yeah, and I think you've summarized it uh, perfectly. So basically, I think they're trying it and not seeing anything too new. Actually, if you think about it, Apex Legend and New State did introduce some new things, which I detail in the report. But I believe that it just wasn't enough. Like Apex Legends, you have abilities for characters, and also for New State, I think there was like weapon modifications and stuff like that. So there were small differences, but the structure of a game was the same. I think
Right.
what players will notice the most is structural differences, and that's what will make them switch, because it's like, oh, this I play this in a totally different way. For example, Rainbow Six Mobile could be, it's like team based, and you control operators and each with special powers, and you have to work as a team. Most times when I'm not a very high level battle royale player, so most times I go into a battle royale game and my teammates are all just running around doing their own thing.
Right. And and talking about Apex Legends, I mean, it's doing kind of okay-ish, right? And congrats to them for winning Game of the Year by
Yeah,
multiple yeah, multiple publications. But I would have hoped that Apex Legends Mobile did a little bit better. Do you have any thoughts on the performance of Apex Legends Mobile, or what do you think?
yeah. I think like it started well enough, like it
Mhm.
had tons of pre-registrations, but it just probably isn't different enough to get people to switch, because I guess they're quite loyal, like especially for spenders. You've spent so much amount of your cosmetics and stuff like in PUBG. Why would you want to give all of that away and join this completely new game where you have to build up your prestige again?
Right.
Unless it's there's a real reason for you to switch, and all your friends are going to this new game because it's like, oh, like there's a completely new way to play.
Okay. Well, Jordan, I think those are all the questions that I have. Is there any last message, or if you were to have a final message to our audience about anything they should be looking out for, or trends, or anything like that? Any final message from you, Jordan?
I think the last point I would say is 2023 is going to be a great year for shooters.
Yep.
Get excited because it's going to shake things up. 2022 was kind of a little bit, there wasn't much action going on,
Yeah.
but 2023 is going to be fun.
Okay. Great. Well, Jordan, thank you so much for your time, and also to our audience. If you want to, they can get access to this report, right?
Yes, just
Then
go to the Naavik website and you'll be able to download a copy of the full report.
awesome. I will leave a link to that in the show notes. Jordan, thank you for your time, and to our audience, we will catch you next time. Thanks.
Bye.